Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In my previous video I looked at the factors leading to the writing of The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft in the summer of 1926, and today I'm going to be looking at The Colour Out of Space, a tale that he wrote several months later in March 1927. I'm going to be looking at the horror in the story, how it works and why it works so well. Firstly, I'm going to recap the story, and then I'm going to look at the potential dating of it, and then I'm going to examine how the horror works in the story and provide some examples. So with that said, let's have a look at the story itself. A surveyor is travelling to the west of Arkham, and he encounters a bleak terrain that the locals call the Blasted Heath. And just to give you an idea of what the Blasted Heath looks like in Lovecraft's mind, he drew it in a letter to F. Lee Baldwin on the 27th of March 1934. So this Blasted Heath, the surveyor wants answers for, and he meets a local man by the name of Ammi Pierce, and he tells him that a meteorite fell on some farmland in June of 1882. Some scientists from the local university, the Miskatonic University, take a specimen from the meteorite and examine it in a laboratory, and they're essentially nonplussed by it. They don't know the nature of it. It emits this strange light, this strange colour. Anyway, some of this meteorite lands in a well on Naim Gardener's farmland, and it begins to affect the vegetation and the livestock surrounding the well and on the farmland, to the point that the vegetation starts to turn grey and then crumbles, and then the livestock turns grey and crumbles, and eventually it affects Naim's wife. It causes her to go insane, and then sometime later 2 of his sons go missing and 1 goes insane as well. Ammi Pierce, concerned for Naim's family, goes to visit him, and Naim is on the brink of insanity. In fact, at this point, he is on the brink. He is insane. And after a brief exchange, Naim passes away to the effects of the meteorite. Ammi contacts the local authorities, and the local authorities come to the scene, and they try and make some sense of what has happened here in the Naim residence and the farmland. And the meteorite begins affecting the landscape. So, there are these bizarre colours. The trees start moving when they shouldn't be moving, and so on and so forth. And then eventually the meteorite shoots back up or at least a colour shoots back up into the sky and then disappears. And then come the end of the story, the surveyor returns to the Blasted Heath because he's concerned that the meteorite might affect Ammi. And the surveyor notes at the very end that the Blasted Heath is growing inch by inch every year. So that's a brief summary of The Colour Out of Space. Where does it fit in Lovecraft's corpus? After he wrote The Call of Cthulhu in 1926, there's this explosion of writing from The Call of Cthulhu all up to The Colour Out of Space. And just to give you an idea of all the stories that he wrote, here's the list of it. So he writes, obviously, The Call of Cthulhu in mid to late August, maybe even early September of 1926. And then he writes Pickman's Model in late August or early September 1926. And then around mid to late October, early November, he writes The Silver Key. And on the 9th of November, he writes The Strange Eye House, In the Mist. And then in the autumn of 1926, all the way up to January 22nd, 1927, he writes his 42,000-word Green Quest of Unknown Kadath. And then either on the same day as he's finished it, or maybe a day later, he writes The Case of Charles Dexter Ward up until early March, and then at some point a couple of weeks later he writes The Colour Out of Space. At the moment all we have is that he wrote it in March, but based on some letters we can shorten that window, and then based on the word count and based on the word count of a couple of other stories we can speculate as to when he actually wrote it. So on the 15th of March 1927, he writes to Clark Ashton Smith, among other things, that he just completed, obviously, his 2 novels, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath and The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. And he says here, I think I said I finished my 147-page novelette. This, in addition to the 110 pages finished shortly before, makes a hellish job of typing ahead of me. I doubt if I shall try it just yet, for there are short tales I wish to write, and this being, of course, The Colour Out of Space. So this is on the 15th of March. A day later, on the 16th of March, he writes a postcard to Donald Wandry, and the post stamp is for 4:30 p.m. So it's possible that he wrote this, or he started writing this tale in the afternoon or the evening on the 16th of March. The next letter that we have is to Clark Ashton Smith on the 24th of March 1926, saying that I have just finished writing The Colour Out of Space. Now, don't be fooled by "I have just finished." A couple of days later, he writes to Bernard Dwyer using the exact same phrase, "I have just finished writing The Colour Out of Space." So this time reference, "I have just," doesn't necessarily mean today. And because it doesn't use today or yesterday or a couple of days ago, the latest that it could have finished this story is the 21st. And because the story itself, The Colour Out of Space, is 12,457 words, the two other stories of similar word count that we know that began and ended on specific dates were his 1924 The Shunned House and his 1933 The Thing on the Doorstep, both roughly 11,000 words. And these two stories took him 4 days to write. So if we assume that he wrote on successive days and he wrote at the same pace that he did with these other two tales, if he started on the 16th, he finished on the 19th of March. And if he started on the 17th, he finished on the 20th. And if he started on the 18th, he finished on the 21st of March. And this I'm referring to The Colour Out of Space. It's entirely possible that he wrote from the 16th to the 21st, but based on these two letters and the word count and the word count of similar stories, he wrote it during this period of time. So that's the potential dating for The Colour Out of Space. How does the horror work in the story? Like most of Lovecraft's tales, he uses the fear of the unknown to his advantage. And the unknown about the meteorite and the globule inside it is we don't know its telos. We don't know its purpose. We don't know its end. And just to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by telos. If I had a cup and the cup contains coffee, the telos of that cup is to hold the coffee or the tea or the water inside of it. And a good cup will do that, and a bad cup will leak the contents. And you can apply telos to parts of the body, so the telos of the eye is vision, and the telos of the heart is to be blood around the body. And you can even apply it to living things, so the telos of a cat and the telos of a dog. In the Aristotelian sense, the telos of a human being is human flourishing. But what about the meteorites? So in the story, the scientists take a specimen from the meteorite that's fallen, and they do these tests on it, and come the end of it, they're nonplussed. And I'm going to read the final paragraph of the scene where they basically say, "We have no idea what this meteorite is." And I'm reading from the first edition of the Library of America. Quote, "Conjecture was vain, so after a futile attempt to find additional globules by drilling, the seekers left again with their new specimen, which proved, however, as baffling in the laboratory as its predecessor had been. Aside from being almost plastic, having heat, magnetism, and slight luminosity, cooling slightly in powerful acid, possessing an unknown spectrum, wasting away in air, and attacking silicon compounds with mutual destruction as a result, it presented no identifying features whatsoever, and at the end of the tests, the college scientists were forced to own that they could not place it. It was nothing of this earth, but a piece of the great outside, and as such, endowed with outside properties and obedient to outside laws." So, the scientists have no idea. And because the scientists have no idea, Nahum Gardner and the Gardner family also have no idea what its purpose is and what it's supposed to do. And because we don't know what the purpose is, and because they don't know what the purpose is, when it starts to become a problem, we don't know how to tackle it. So let's take, for example, fire. The telos of fire is to consume whatever it is it's burning. And because we know how fire works, and because we know its purpose and we know its end, if we wanted to stop the fire, we could use water or we could suffocate it. Because we know its telos, we know how to stop fire. But because we don't know the telos of the meteorite, we don't know how to stop it. Or Gardner doesn't know how to stop it, or the scientists don't know how to stop it. Nobody knows. And because it's unstoppable, it's horrifying. As I recapped earlier on in this video, it begins by changing the landscape around it, and it begins changing the vegetation. It turns it grey, it begins crumbling, and then it starts affecting the livestock, and they start crumbling, and then it starts affecting Nahum's family. Nabi goes insane, Nahum's wife, and Nahum can't do anything about it because he just does not understand. Nobody understands how the meteorite works, the nature of it, and so on and so forth. Now, Lovecraft has used Telos in previous stories, namely the Call of Cthulhu and the Unknowable. But unlike those two stories, Lovecraft in the Colour Out of Space shows not only how the lack of Telos, or rather because we don't know the Telos of the meteorite, Lovecraft explores what humans do to other humans in this situation. So part way in the story, when Ami goes to Nahum and they have this brief exchange, and this is after his sons have passed away and one's gone insane and Nabi's in the attic. He goes to Nahum's house and he's talking to him and they have this exchange, and then Ami goes upstairs into the attic to find Nabi. So again, I'm just going to read the scene for you. Quote, "It was dark inside, for the window was small and half obscured by the crude wooden bars, and Ami could see nothing at all on the wide planked floor. The stench was beyond enduring, and before proceeding further he had to retreat to another room and return with his lungs filled with breathable air. When he did enter, he saw something dark in the corner, and upon seeing it more clearly, he screamed outright. While he screamed, he thought a momentary cloud eclipsed the window, and a second later he felt himself brushed as if by some hateful current of vapour. Strange colours danced before his eyes, and had not a present horror numbed him, he would have thought of the globule in the meteor that the geologist's hammer had shattered, and of the morbid vegetation that had sprouted in the spring. As it was, he thought only of the blasphemous monstrosity which confronted him, and which all too clearly had shared the nameless fate of young Thaddeus and the livestock. But the terrible thing about this horror was that it very slowly and perceptibly moved as it continued to crumble. Ami will give me no added particulars to this scene, but the shape in the corner does not reappear in this tale as a moving object. There are things which cannot be mentioned, and what is done in common humanity is sometimes cruelly judged by the law. I gathered that no moving thing was left in that attic room, and that to leave anything capable of motion there would have been a deed so monstrous as to damn any accountable being to eternal torment. Anyone but a stolid farmer would have fainted or gone mad, but Ami walked conscious through that low doorway and locked the accursed secret behind him." So Lovecraft here is intentionally vague, but what Ami has done here, and I'll read another passage to back this up, is that Ami, in a merciful way, killed Nabi. And if I just find here, quote, "A feeble scratching on the floor downstairs now sounded distinctly, and Ami's grip tightened on a heavy stick he had picked up in the attic for some purpose." So this stick, whatever he did with the stick, he ended Nabi's life. And it was just a way of ending her torment from the meteor's influence. So in the face of something that they cannot understand, they don't understand the telos, they don't understand the purpose, they don't understand the end of the meteorite. Rather than trying to deal with that, the only thing they can deal with is ending the suffering of those affected by the meteorite. And this horror is compounded by the fact that at the very end of the story, the surveyor notes that the blasted heath, the area affected by the meteorite, is growing inch by inch each year. So that's how the horror works in the Colour Out of Space. We don't understand the telos of the meteorite, and because we don't understand it, we don't know how to stop it. And the only thing that we can do is end the suffering of those under the influence of the meteorite. So what did Lovecraft think of this story? On May 12th, 1927, he writes to Clark Ashton Smith saying that the story lacks climax and compactness. And you could argue that after the scene where Nahum succumbs to the meteorite, that the scenes following that could have been shortened. He pads out the scene where the local authorities see the meteorite and its effects on the landscape, and the scene following that could have been shortened as well, where the narrator has concerns for Ami Pierce and his well-being. But I think it works. I think dragging out the effects of the meteorite, and even the local authorities can't do anything about it, just adds to the horror. That said, on November 10th, 1936, he writes another letter to a friend and correspondent that it's actually the only story, The Colour Out of Space, that actually satisfies him as a whole. So he eventually comes round to liking the story, along with the Cats of Ulthar as well. So that's the colour out of space. That's how the horror works in it. If you found this video interesting, please give it a like, comment, subscribe. And if you think somebody else would find this video interesting, please share it with them. It will really help me out. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.